Hi everybody, it's Hilary here from We Love Smart Keto. Great to see you here today. I hope you're having a wonderful Independence Day weekend, a 4th of July weekend. I know that it's pretty tough this year with all the coronavirus situation and having to stay home a lot. So I hope that you found a safe and enjoyable way to have a lovely Independence Day. So welcome to the live stream. We're going to be talking today, we're going to be asking the question talking about why the keto diet isn't a fad. I think that's a pretty important thing for us to understand. If it's something that we're doing, as a lifestyle, we need to really understand why what we're doing is healthy and safe. And the last Facebook Live I did, I answered that question about the long-term effects of the keto diet. But what I want to talk to you today about is whether that keto diet is here to stay or not, or whether it's just another passing fad in the wind. So give me a like if you're here so that I know that you're here, and give me a like if it's a topic that you want to hear about. For me, that's really important. I talk to you about topics that you want to hear about. For me, it's an important thing because I want to know that what I'm doing is a safe and well thing to do. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, in fact, it's interesting because in some ways, the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet that we've been told to do for the last 50 years, in some ways that could be considered a fad diet. If we actually have a look at how that came about, or probably just after the war, the Second World War, in the early 1950s, when people started to notice that sort of middle-aged men were having more heart attacks. And so they decided to go off and study this. There was a gentleman called Dr. Ansel Keys, who some of you may have heard of, became a very powerful man. And he got a lot of money, and hi Rita, he got a lot of money and he went off and studied many countries, something like 20 odd different countries, and went and looked at what they were eating and what their health was like, particularly their heart health. And what he discovered was that he had this theory and the data didn't really meet his theory. And we can't say that he doctored the data, but it's very strange that even though he had multiple countries, he actually only published the data from 7 countries. It's called the 7 country studies. And those 7 countries supported the evidence for them supposedly supported his theory that to eat a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet was good for your health. Now, there's a wonderful, it's kind of quite typical, isn't it, that, and something we see a lot in medicine and medical research, is that actually, particularly for women, the research and what all the recommendations that we get are actually often not based on women's study of women's health. They're often based on study of men's health. So that's probably one thing to be aware of. The second thing to be aware of with it is that when you actually delve into the data, and there's a wonderful woman called Nina Teicholz who's a journalist, wrote a really fantastic book. It's a very big book called Big Fat Lies, and she actually delved into all the data and looked at it. And when you actually look at what he said, so I'm just going to check the comments, see if I can see them. I can't see them for some reason today, so apologies if you're commenting and I can't see it. When she actually delved into what Ansel Keys was looking at, really it all boiled down to one country, and that's one place, in fact, not even a country, and that's to Crete, which is a very beautiful and relaxed island off the coast of Italy. And Ansel Keys actually fell in love totally with the Mediterranean way of life, and in fact, when he retired, he and his wife moved to Italy and spent their last days there, which obviously is a very lovely place to be. So he looked at 650 men in Crete, and looked at Crete and Corfu, and looked at their heart health and what they were eating. Now, there's just one small problem with that, was that they didn't do very good food diaries. And in fact, there was lots of issues with the food diaries that they took from these men. And so in the end, he threw that data from that 650 men out, but he did have good food diaries for 65 men. So of those 65 men, he took those food diaries, looked at what they were eating, and in fact, the whole low-fat, high carbohydrate diet that we've known for many, many years actually based off fundamentally the food diaries of those 65 men. How many people do we have in the US? 300 million. So when you consider that the diet recommendations for 300 million people is based off fundamentally these recommendations from these food diaries of 65 people, you start to wonder about the quality of the data. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of other studies since, and I'll talk about those in a second. But there's just one thing that I want to mention about those food diaries of those 65 people, and that is that those food diaries were taken while those men were in Lent. And I don't know if you're a person of faith, but even if you're not, I'm sure you've heard of Lent. It's those that month before Easter when people, say renounce things and say that they're going to make a commitment for those 4 weeks. And in Crete, traditionally, you didn't eat meat during that period, and you cut down on the amount of dairy and eggs and things you're eating. So the diet that they based it off was actually not the diet that was the preferred Cretan diet. And similarly, it was actually after the war. And if you know anything about the Second World War, you'll know that the Italians were not on the winning side of the war. And in fact, they were very poor and not doing very well food-wise after the Second World War. And in fact, those men were complaining that the men in Crete were complaining that they couldn't eat the food that they liked to eat, and they wanted to eat a lot more meat than they were able to get hold of. And so, in fact, in the 50 years since then, if you look at the Italian men and their height and weight, they eat a lot more meat. And in fact, they're now, in general, much taller than they were in that post-war period. So very questionable to base, the diet basically for the whole of the Western world fundamentally on, the study of a very few people in a very few number of countries, and not actually just a diet by some conclusions by association, not actually proven through controlled experiments. So let me know in the comments what you think of that. Are you surprised? Did you know that already? Are you outraged? Let me know what you think. Let me see if I can see some of these comments. I'm just having a little trouble today with the system, but I will certainly come back. Do let me know what you think, and I'll certainly come back after I've got off the live and have a look at those comments. So while there have been a lot of studies since those Ansel Key foundational studies, not one of them has actually proved that the low-fat, high carbohydrate diet is a diet that's good for heart health. So we've said that, that diet that we've been told to do for the last 50 or so years, not a lot of solid evidence behind it being good for us. So then how do we know that the keto diet is not a fad diet and is a diet that we can rely on? So if we actually look back at the origins of that, obviously there's many native peoples that eat that kind of way. We talked about that last time, like the Inuit, the Maasai people in Kenya, and in fact I think some of the Mongolian people as well, a whole range of different peoples, the Aboriginal peoples in Australia as well, traditionally. But if we actually look back to our first time that we see the keto diet in history, it's actually in the 1860s in London with a very enthusiastic man called William Banting. He was a merchant in London, and he retired, and as he retired, he got a little bit portly. And he wasn't very happy with being a little bit overweight, and so he went to consult his doctor. His doctor was called William Harvey. Yeah, it is crazy, Alex. It is crazy, crazy conclusion. I thoroughly recommend that book. Yeah, and it's there's a lot of questionable science that we've seen over these last 50 years. So anyway, back to William Banting. and his doctor. And his doctor, William Harvey, was aware that in France they were treating people with type 1 diabetes. So that's the diabetes that you get when you're young. The children sometimes often have, but sometimes have. And noticed that they were treating them with a diet with no carbohydrates, and that those children and adults were doing well. And so he recommended to William Banting that he should follow this diet and not eat any carbohydrates, cut out, potatoes and things like that. And so William Banting did that, and he would row for 2 hours a day on the Thames, on the River Thames, a very beautiful river through the middle of London. And he lost a lot of weight, and he became extremely enthusiastic about this diet and really promoted it, and wrote a monograph, so a short book, like an ebook, I guess we would call it these days. I wrote about it and really promoted it. So he's really the first person that we see really following this deliberately, rather than just as part of his natural diet that everybody else is eating. And since then, there were a lot of people, actually a number of people in the scientific profession that followed the keto diet and experimented on it, did controlled experiments, and really understood the physiology of the body and hormones like insulin and what they did to the body, and really studied them and produced some very good papers. But what happened was that the low-fat, high-carbohydrate school of science got really powerful, and people like Ansel Keys and Nina Teicholz talks about this. He would actually go out of his way to critique people's papers and put very damning commentary on them and make sure that they didn't get funding for their studies. And so if you're a scientist, what are you going to study? You're going to study the area where you can get some money and some funding to study, or and where people are going to be nice to you, or are you going to study where it's really hard and really difficult to study, and you're a pariah whenever you go into a conference, for example. So what happened was there were people who did continue to study the keto diet, but their papers didn't get published in the top journals, which is where you see scientific papers. So things like the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine. Those are the sorts of places where you really get noticed. If you're going to publish in a backwater journal, scientific journal, then people don't notice so much what you're publishing. Which is not to say that there aren't people that didn't try and promote the diet, and some of them did really well. So if we look at sort of the equivalent of Ansel Keys in the keto world, it's Dr. Robert Atkins. Give me a thumbs up or a yes if you've heard of Robert Atkins. I think most of us probably have. Well known for his bacon and eggs diet in the 1970s. Very, very popular diet, best-selling, New York Times best-selling book for a long time, and in fact still in print today, Dr. Atkins' diet. And he was actually a cardiologist. He wasn't a scientist. He was a cardiologist in New York, claimed to have treated about 50,000 people, so a lot of people, and put them on the Atkins diet, which was basically what we know as the keto diet today. So moderate protein, high fat, low carbohydrate diet. And, and he got a lot of success and very, very popular. So it's interesting, why in the 1970s didn't the keto diet become more accepted? Well, effectively, he was a bit of an ornery guy, as I understand it. He was difficult to get along with. He didn't do any scientific studies on his work. Excuse me just a second. He didn't do any scientific studies on his work. And even though he offered to open his doors to and his papers to people to look at, nobody took him up on the offer. I'm not sure why not. And eventually, when he died, he slipped on an icy pavement in New York, fell over, unfortunately had a head injury, and died a few days later. And shortly after that, his business went bankrupt. So really, his diet, which did work but didn't have the scientific proof behind it, really kind of fell away, and the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet came up. And we see what that's done for society in the US. There are 60% of adults who have either got metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes or are overweight. So it's that's pretty phenomenal. So clearly something has not been working. And so there have been people who've been really studying the keto diet and doing a lot of work on it. And now we have some really strong promoters, people like Dr. Jason Fung, doctor from Canada, Dr. Eric Berg, who's, posts a lot about the science of it. People like Professor Tim Noakes, who's a professor, sports medicine professor in South Africa, who's done a lot of work to promote this diet internationally. And so now we starting to see, and I think we're starting to see the tide turn on the keto diet, and it's becoming much more understood. And there have been some studies, which I'll talk about another day. There have been some controlled studies which really demonstrate that the keto diet is really effective and is very good for our internal health markers, as well as that outward signal of a body weight that fits our body size. Yes, you almost did the keto diet, Alex, 20 years ago. Yes, I think it was very popular, and everybody thought it was a little bit strange, but it worked, so people did it. But you often got laughed at if you're just eating that bacon stuff. But now we've really learned that actually he was wise, although perhaps his personality didn't allow his ideas to get out as far as perhaps they could have and become as established as they could have. So that's a little bit of a long talk, and I hope you've enjoyed the story. Today is not really about tips. It's just really trying to give you a little bit of understanding about the background of the keto lifestyle and where it's come from, and why I believe it's really a lifestyle that's here to stay. And we can be confident that what we're doing is appropriate. The other thing I would say is science is not a fixed thing. Science changes, right? And so the things that we were doing 5 years ago, perhaps some of them we're not doing now because science has moved on and science has learned. So one of the things that I'm making a commitment to you here in We Love Smart Keto is that that I believe that we should have tight opinions loosely held. So we should believe strongly in what we do, but we also need to be open to other ideas. And as science and evidence comes along that shows us that maybe there are better and different ways of doing things, then I'll commit to bringing those to you. So tight opinions loosely held is kind of a bit of a mantra for a good scientist, and I think we've seen over the last 50 years that some of these scientists have had tight opinions tightly held, and for us as a community hasn't really served us. So that's what I have to talk to you today. It's a little bit of a story and a little bit of a rant, but I hope it's really helpful and useful. So, please let me know. Are you surprised, shocked? Does it give you more confidence? Please let me know what you think. We'll be back to questions and answers shortly. I'm away a little bit this week, so I'll post as I can in the group. But please let me know your questions and your answers. Please let me know what you thought of this Facebook Live. Was it interesting? Was it not so interesting? Because I want to make sure that I post things that you find useful, relevant, and valuable. But I'm happy you've had a great holiday weekend, and we'll see you soon in the group. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.